going to go ahead and replace our passenger side rear wheel hub bearing here. It's located right behind our rear brake rotor. The process for this here is the same for the driver's side. Using a 22mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our lug nuts. Go ahead and remove the wheel, set it aside. We're going to go ahead and remove our rear brake caliper and bracket. We're going to do this as one assembly. Using our 17mm deep socket on the back side here, there are 2 bolts. There's one up top here and one down below. Let's loosen and remove these. Now I'm going to loosen and remove the lower bolt first. I'm going to go ahead and loosen and remove the lower bolt first. The reason for that is that when I go to do the top one, I want to be able to hold and support the caliper and the bracket. We don't want this dropping and causing abnormal pressure on this flex hose here that can damage that. Go ahead and remove the bolt. We'll go ahead and slide our caliper and bracket off, and we're simply going to flip this over, set this aside. Using a Phillips head screwdriver, I want to get and remove the 2 screws supporting our brake rotor in place here. Now, if your vehicle doesn't have these, that's totally fine. It's not critical to the operation of the vehicle. They're just placed here from the factory to hold the rotor in place during assembly. In our case, we do have the screws. I'm going to remove those, set those aside, and go ahead and remove our brake rotor and set that aside. On our spindle or axle nut here, there is a dimple right here on the nut. We want to go ahead and use our punch, and we're going to open that up a little bit. With that opened up, let's go ahead, loosen, and remove that nut. Using a 36mm socket, we want to go ahead and remove that nut. Once we have the axle nut off, why don't you go ahead and just check and make sure that that axle is loose inside the hub, and ours is. If it isn't, you go ahead and use a punch, set that in there, give it a few whacks to go ahead and separate the splines from the axle from the wheel hub. Make sure that is free. On the back side here, right by our CV axle, we're going to have 4 17mm bolts holding our wheel hub to the knuckle. You can see a couple right here, and then there's a couple on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and use our socket, get that on in there with a little extension and our ratchet. Let's go ahead and start to loosen these. I'm going to go ahead and loosen these first, and then we'll go ahead and remove them. At this point here, we're going to loosen and remove these 2 completely on this side here. The 2 on the other side are a little bit tougher to work with. So we're just going to get these out. That way we can focus on the other 2. What we're going to do is use our jack underneath the control arm here. The reason for this is to get to this lower 17mm bolt. we have our sway bar end link that's interfering, as well as the upper or the lower control arm of getting a straight shot in here. So our plan is to go ahead and raise the suspension. We're not going to lift the vehicle off of our lift here. We just want to go ahead and compress the suspension. And hopefully this will give us more of a straight-on shot with our socket and ratchet in there. Now with the suspension compressed upward, I'm able to use a 17mm socket, our swivel, along with our ratchet. Let's go ahead and break that bolt free. Get that bolt out. Now the upper rearward bolt here, I'm going to use a wrench for clearance purposes because your sway bar end link is right there. Now I'll go ahead and spin that bolt out. At this point here, we're going to go ahead and lower our jack. And we'll go ahead and roll that away. With our 4 bolts removed from the back of the wheel hub, we're going to go ahead and start working on our flange here using our hammer, and we want to go ahead and loosen this and pull it straight out towards you. Now on the inside of our knuckle area here, you're going to have your ABS sensor right here, so you have to be super careful of that. Just a plastic sensor. We're going to go ahead and run our towel in here. We just want to clean up any debris that might be in there. I want to have this be a nice smooth surface for this to go in. I wouldn't recommend using chemicals on this here to get it on that sensor. You could ruin it. Inspect the splines on your CV axle. Make sure everything is good there. What I like to do is use a little bit of anti-seize compound on the threads or the splines themselves of the CV axle. You have your new bearing here. There's an ABS magnetic tone ring pickup on the backside here. You do not want to touch the backside with any type of metal surface like a screwdriver or a tool or anything like that there. So make sure that that is clean and has not been altered or touched like that. Slide this over the CV axle and the splines will engage. Position our hub and we'll feed that up inside. Now you can get a visual on the other side to see where the holes are going to line up for your bolts on the other side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the bolts here. I'm going to put it through on the rear upper bolt hole. Just going to feed that through the back of the knuckle. And I'm going to try and just kind of position my hub to get one of these bolts started. So I'm going to try and thread that from the other side. Once you got it caught, you know that the other three are going to line right up. Just go back around the back side and get the other 3 bolts installed, and we'll tighten those down. I like to go ahead and thread these bolts in as far as I can by hand. Now, if your bolts are dirty, rusty, or anything like that, go ahead and use a wire brush or a machine to go ahead and clean the threads. And then you can go ahead and get these installed. They'll spin in nice and easy. I'll go ahead and get that lower one installed here. With all the other bolts installed, let's go ahead and put our jack back underneath the control arm. Let's go ahead and raise this up. Now I did switch over to 3/8, a little bit smaller equipment to get in here. And all I'm doing is I'm snugging these bolts down, and then we'll come back and we'll torque those into position. Let's go ahead and torque down our bolts to 72 foot-pounds. Now that we're torqued down in position, let's go ahead and lower our jack. And once that's down, we'll go ahead and put that aside. Let's go ahead and install our axle nut. Now, normally what you want to do is you want to replace the axle nut with a new one. In our case here, we're going to go ahead and install the factory one. We'll spin that on, we'll tighten that down. Let's go ahead and torque down our axle nut here to 181 foot-pounds. You can see that our hub is turning, so what we're going to do is we're going to install a couple lug nuts here. We're going to use a breaker bar to keep that hub from rotating, and then we'll finish torquing this. Once we have the axle nut torqued, we're going to go ahead and dimple the nut into the axle. You can use your punch, your hammer. I like to install or put some anti-seize compound around the hub face and a little bit onto the hub as well. This will keep our brake rotor from rusting and sticking to the hub itself. You got to remove those lug nuts. Now, if you have the screws that were holding your brake rotor in place, you want to go ahead and make sure that you're lining up the threaded ports here with your brake rotor. Once that's on, go ahead and put your screws in. Let's go ahead and snug those down. Let's go ahead and install a brake caliper and bracket. What you do is go ahead and grab your brake caliper and bracket. Slide those brake pads over the rotor. Go ahead and get the upper bolt started here. Just going to get that bolt started a few threads. Now we did go ahead and clean up the threads on our wire wheel machine so that this goes in nice and easy. All right, we have both of them started. Let's go ahead and snug those down. I'm going to go ahead and torque these bolts down to 65 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and install our wheel. Get all of our lug nuts started by hand. And then once these are all on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Let's go ahead and torque down our lug nuts to 95 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.